Well, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come to the ILSI meeting and to be on this session this morning with my distinguished colleagues. These are my disclosures, a variety of sources, and to one of the other Steves out there, I would love to add your name to that list next time. Where's Okay, now I am a professor, we start with a pop quiz. Which of these exposures causes more deaths around the world than any other? You have to vote on at least one. If you don't vote, you get an F this morning. So you have to pick at least one. And you already know what mine is, so don't try to humor me. I mean, you know which one I'm going to vote for. But how many say tobacco use causes more deaths than anything else? How many say obesity? How many say high blood pressure? How many say physical inactivity? Yeah, you're humoring me, I know. How many say high blood glucose? Okay, well, there weren't really a whole lot of passes this morning, I am sorry to say. And part of the reason is that you get misled. Even those of you who are scientists, you get misled by what's blasting you all the time from the popular media. For example, it's over a year ago, there's no need to, or about a year ago, no need for me to do another search, but you know, you put in inactivity. Oh, well, yes, 3 million hits in Google. Yeah, same, physical inactivity. Sedentary behavior that we're talking about, or at least Mark, John, and Jim will be talking about later. And then obesity, 30-fold more hits. Eating too much, more than 130 times more hits than inactivity. Diet and obesity, and then we come down. So I do try to irritate people, and at least make them think about physical activity, fitness, low fitness, inactivity as a cause of health problems. This is what we're bombarded with. We published a paper on a call to action for physical activity in clinical medicine just this month, actually. And when we submitted the document, we put some of these numbers in there. And one of the reviewers said, well, yes, but that's Google, 30-fold more. That's Google. What about PubMed? 40-fold more on obesity relative to inactivity. So I like to get a little more balance. Now here's what the World Health Organization says are the leading risk factors for death, high blood pressure at the top, and so forth. And actually a more recent paper, which I maybe like even better, from a Lancet physical activity series, they devoted an entire issue just before the Olympics to physical activity issues. Many investigators from around the world wrote these various articles. Dr. Ai-Min Lee from Harvard led the effort on this paper, and here are the essential findings. 6 to 10% of the world's non-communicable chronic diseases attributable to inactivity. You see the number of deaths. And at every step of the way, the authors and the reviewers kind of took the more conservative approach to these calculations, and this comes up more than 5 million deaths. And you see at the bottom, well, to put that in perspective, that's actually about the same as smoking. And my position is that these data, or these estimates, are underestimates because the vast majority of the studies and the vast majority of the data out there use self-report of physical activity. And those are lousy measures. They correlate, you look at the various questionnaires, and the ones I've used, the ones I've developed. You correlate them with a gold standard measure. The correlation is 0.3, 0.4, maybe occasionally 0.5. Now I ask you, if we had a measure of blood pressure that only correlated 0.4 with the truth, we wouldn't find blood pressure is so important. So we've been underestimating. You know, we epidemiologists call that misclassification when you don't measure something well, and that leads to lower estimates of the effect of that particular exposure. So here's a report we published, when was that? Oh, I don't have the year on there. I think in 2011. In which in this large cohort we have self-report of physical activity, and the two bars on your left for women and men, low, moderate, oh my goodness, something happened to the slide here on the projector, but low, moderate, and high activity, those are significant trends. The odds ratios are lower in the moderate and high active people. You look to the two bars on the, or the two sets of bars on the left. This is from an objective measure of cardiorespiratory fitness, maximal exercise test in the laboratory. And you see the odds ratios. The yellow bar is low fitness, the blue bar is moderate fitness, and the pink bar is high fitness. The odds ratios there are much lower than the odds ratios for self-reported physical activity. And I attribute that to simply the better measures. It's a laboratory, more accurate measure, and the principal determinant of your cardiorespiratory fitness is your exercise habits. So again, I think the estimates that we have made, that others have made on deaths due to inactivity are in fact underestimates. Now, I've been following this large cohort of tens of thousands of people for quite a long time, started in 1980 with my involvement. These data come from a very extensive medical examination that takes 3 or 4 hours to complete. So we're not basing the analyses here on, again, self-report of activity or self-report of height and weight, et cetera. We have laboratory measures of all kinds of risk factors, not only height and weight, but percent body fat, waist circumference, cardiorespiratory fitness, and the like. In the first paper we published, an old paper now, on fitness and mortality, you see for women in yellow and men in pink across low, moderate, and high fitness categories. Get out of that low fit group, which is the bottom 20%, and get just into the moderately fit group. You don't have to become a marathon runner. You cut your risk of dying in half. You get out in the high fit group, that's the top 40%. Again, that's not just a few triathletes. There's a little further reduction. But the biggest public health benefit would be to get everybody to get those 150 minutes a week of moderate activity, which would get almost everyone out of the low fit category, would have a huge effect on chronic diseases, mortality, et cetera. What about fitness and mortality in individuals in the prime of life? Here's a paper we published a few years ago, and again, I'm sorry I can't use a pointer, but you're probably all smart enough to get this. You see 3 different age groups, and again, low, moderate, and high fitness, low fit being the yellow, and a steep inverse gradient in all 3 age groups. Now look at the bar on the far right, that blue turquoise bar on the far right. Those are the high fit individuals, 80 and older. Compare that death rate to the yellow bar on the far left, which is the low fit for the low fit individuals, 20, 25 years younger. Fitness is more powerful in 2 decades of aging as a risk for mortality. And then we look at fitness as it's associated with health outcomes and mortality in various subgroups. For example, here, this group of men all had physician-diagnosed hypertension. And the people who come to this clinic and get this exam are like the people in this room. They're mid to upper socioeconomic strata, business executives, professionals, and the like. They can afford health care. They have to pay $3,000 or $4,000 for this exam. So we have on the medical history these 8,147 men who had a physician diagnosis of hypertension. Then at the time of the examination, some of them in the bars on the left, their blood pressure was normal, so their hypertension was controlled. In the middle, well, their blood pressure was still elevated, stage 1 hypertension, and on the right, stage 2 hypertension. And again, across low, moderate, high fitness, you see this inverse gradient that you're probably getting tired of me showing you. And once again, look at the bar on the far right, look at that death rate, or no, this is CVD incidence, I'm sorry, and compare that to the incidence in the bar on the far left. So in this population, these men were better off to let their blood pressure go to heck and be high fit. They were less likely to have that heart attack or stroke than the guys who were sedentary and unfit, but whose blood pressure was controlled. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't try to control blood pressure. I am trying to put activity and low fitness in the context of other health outcomes. For example, in this group of men, again, with physician-diagnosed type 2 diabetes. So at the examination, their height and weight is measured. They're sorted into a normal weight, overweight, and obese categories, and again, low, moderate, and high fitness in each of those. Except in the obese group, there aren't a lot of obese guys who are high fit. If you search carefully around this room, you could find one, maybe even more than one, who are obese but high fit. But in this analysis, we combine the moderate and high fit group. And again, look at the risk of cardiovascular disease death in that pink bar on the right compared to the yellow bar on the left. Now today, in this city, there will be thousands, tens of thousands of patients with type 2 diabetes go see their primary health care provider. I would wager that virtually every single one of them will have their height and weight measured and get sorted into a BMI category. I mean, I try. I go see my doctor. I say, oh, there's no need to weigh me. We don't need to get on the scale, fat guy, they say. So you can't get out of there without getting weighed. Can you get out of the doctor's office without having a fitness test? Will there be any people with type 2 diabetes today in Miami get a fitness test and those data be used in directing their health care and the counseling? Maybe not. Back to men and women in what I used to call prime of life, 60 and older. This group, these are men and women combined, sorted here into this simple slide. You see the fit ones on the left, and that's just moderately fit, 150 minutes a week will produce that, and the unfit ones on the right. Yellow ones, normal fat, and the pink ones, obese. And this is percent body fat measured in the laboratory, not self-reported height and weight. Well, what matters here, fitness or fatness? How do you get to be fit? Do that 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity a week. And you can tell I get a little irritated. Can't we have a more equal focus? I don't think I've ever said, except when I've been trying to irritate a nutritionist, that we should ignore a diet. Of course, a healthy diet is important. I've never said, again, unless I'm trying to irritate the obesity cartel, that we should ignore the worldwide epidemic of obesity. But couldn't we have just a little better balance? I showed you the one slide from a Google search early on, and here's another example. This paper was published just a few months ago on adiposity and physical disability. You see the men on the top and the women on the bottom with several different measures of adiposity, from weight and waist circumference, percent fat, lean mass, and so forth. And these are quintiles of those measures. And you see in every case for both men and women, steep gradient. The heavier you are, the fatter you are, the more likely you are to be physically disabled. Okay, this is a group of men and women, 7,000, more than 7,000, followed up for 14 years. Their physical disability was assessed by the kind of items that you see on the slide. Can you bathe yourself, walk, feed yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the measure of physical disability. And you can see, boy, these measures of adiposity are really strongly associated with it, right? That means being fat causes disability. Activity or fitness was never mentioned in the article. How can you have an outcome that is physical function and not have taken activity or fitness into account in the analysis? I wrote a letter to the editor, never heard from them, and of course they didn't publish it. But I've told Jim, someday he'll get a phone call. Steve dropped dead at his desk this morning, and it'll be because I see another piece of garbage like this. This is junk science. I would never try to publish a paper on fitness or activity and any health outcome without including in the analysis. We usually include body composition, but at least BMI. I wouldn't even try because I know it wouldn't be successful, but it wouldn't be good science. This happens every week in the world's best scientific journals. I am getting irritated. And then, of course, all the emphasis on how many times have you heard 2/3 of Americans are overweight or obese. Well, that is true using the BMI cut points that we have, but if we really lowered the cut point for overweight to where it should be, down to 22 or something like that, then we could probably say 80% of Americans are overweight. It's going to be an even bigger problem. Well, actually, according to this paper published earlier this month, huge study, data from all around the world, nearly 3 million people. You look for both the men and women. The normal weight individuals, that's the second bar from the left in each set with the asterisk above it, they actually had lower death rates, significantly lower death rates than the normal weight. Now, if you look at all ages, class 2 obesity, see the asterisk there, was elevated. So for all of you young people, worry if you're class 2 obese. But look at those over 65. Now it looks elevated, but it's not significant, that bar on the far right. I'm thinking, what the heck, why do I want to stay in class 1 obesity? I can let it go on up to class 2 and still no, well, you know, I'm not going to do that, but well, I hope I'm not going to do that. But I would like to have more balance, more sanity in these discussions about adiposity and of course diet. Again, diet is important, but let's try to get as much emphasis on activity. So, does it make any difference if you're, say, middle-aged? These are data on men. Middle-aged men. If you're wondering why I don't show as many slides on women, 80% of this cohort is men. So for some of these analyses, we just don't have enough deaths in the women to carry out an analysis. And of course, women, they're not very good subjects for epidemiology studies. Darn women won't die. So you have smaller numbers, and then they refuse to die. And the men, they're good. Boy, they provide us these endpoints. And of course, it's because that men are so much more sensitive and caring, and it's stressful to do that, right? And but anyway, here in this group of men, all of them had 2 exams, and the average number of exams was somewhere between 4 and 5. So we had repeat exams, so we could model, we could look at changes in various risk factors and mortality in the follow-up after exam. So you can see 14,000 men, over 900 men died, and here are the main findings. These are fifths of change in each of the variables. The white line, as you can see, is body weight. The yellow line is percent body fat. Changing those 2 variables simply made no difference. Whether you didn't change, whether you gained a little, whether you lost a little, whether you lost a lot, it made no difference in mortality risk. If you improve your fitness, you change your fitness, you see a significant reduction in risk across quintiles of fitness improvement. Now, I've talked about cardiorespiratory fitness this morning, but I'll touch rather quickly on another component of fitness, which also is mentioned now in our 2008 U.S. Physical Activity Guidelines, and that's muscular strength or resistance training, which is what produces strength. So in this cohort, in a subset of individuals, we have measured muscular strength. Bench press, leg press, put these data together and come up with an index of strength and can compare that exposure then to mortality risk. Here are the data across thirds of muscular strength for both all-cause and cardiovascular disease mortality in 8,700 men. And again, get out of the bottom. Get out of that bottom third. Again, you don't have to be a weightlifter. You don't have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. But do something and get out of that bottom third. It reduces your risk of dying. In a more recent paper in this cohort, and I really like this. This is, I like all of my research, of course, but 1,506 men with physician-diagnosed hypertension at the time of their examination. And these were guys that had their strength measured. As you can see, not a lot of deaths, 183 deaths over the 18 years. But look for the bars on the left where we adjust for the confounders at the bottom of the slide. And the slide on the right, we're adjusting also for cardiorespiratory fitness. But notice the bars on the left, again, a significant inverse gradient across thirds of muscular strength for all-cause mortality in men with hypertension. Now, I know today there will be people go see their cardiologist, guys with or women with hypertension, and they will be told, don't strain, don't lift, you've got hypertension. Well, I'm not sure that's good advice, because doing some resistance training and improving your strength seems to be beneficial. And while that trend isn't significant, 0.11 on the right side, I'm going to say, it looks to me like there is still somewhat of a benefit even after you adjust for cardiorespiratory fitness. So the problem of inactivity is bad. It's going to get worse. Here's a paper we published a couple of years ago, and here's one of the reasons it's going to get worse. We're engineering energy expenditure out of life. And these data from the U.S. Department of Labor over 50 years, I mean, you all could have drawn this slide, even without knowing really anything about the data. Now, I do know about hard work. I grew up on the farm. That's why I went to college. Let me get out of here. And I was visiting a friend in Finland a couple of years ago, and he said, Steve, I know you like the sauna, so why don't you chop some wood and split wood, and we'll have it for the sauna. So I did. Boy, I'm working my tail off, and it was a little warm even there in Finland. So I finished chopping, and then I went to find ILSI to see what he wanted me to do next. There's supervisory work. Now, when Diana Thomas modeled these data on changing occupational status, here is what she came up with. Somehow the numbers aren't appearing, but for men it's a decline of 140 calories a day over this 50-year period in occupational energy expenditure. For women it's 120 calories. That's enough, according to Professor Hill, to explain the obesity epidemic, that positive caloric balance. Tim then asked her to say, here's the weight of American men in 1960 to 62, estimate the weights in these other years. And she's a mathematician, she didn't know what he was doing. In those other years, that's when we had measured weights from Haines. Look at the correlation between the estimates from just occupational energy expenditure decline and Haines weights. The R-squared value for these is 0.92. 92. I challenge you to find studies, even from the physics lab, that report R-squared. So, okay, this is a pretty important contributor. Don't listen to those nitwits who say, well, it's all diet, physical activity hasn't changed. Leisure time self-reported physical activity really hasn't changed over the last 3 or 4 decades. This has changed, and so has this. We just got this paper accepted last week, trends in household energy expenditure. So not occupational, not leisure time, not going to the gym, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I am very proud of this. Note, men, we're doing more than we used to. But look at the decline in, and those numbers kind of come together a bit, but substantial declines in energy expenditure in household. People do less housework, and of course we now have self-propelled vacuum cleaners and so forth. So I'll just close out here with one more slide. Epidemiologists like to calculate attributable fractions, which is an estimate of the percentage of deaths or the number of deaths in a population that we can say is due to a particular characteristic. So here in this slide you see these 6 exposures, risk factors, in men and women, and that's on the vertical axis. It's the percent of deaths of these however many thousands of deaths there were in this cohort over that time, the percent of deaths that we could attribute to that risk factor after adjusting for age, date of exam, and all the other characteristics on this figure. And you can see that 16 to 17% of the deaths, according to these calculations, are due to low fitness. 2 or 3% to obesity. Low fitness causes more deaths in this population than anything else except maybe hypertension in men. So, inactivity, very prevalent, big problem around the world, getting more so even in the low and middle income countries. We have to do something about it if we're going to reverse some of these disastrous health trends of higher rates of non-communicable disease. I think we need to get a little more serious about promoting physical activity. Thank you.